Rowden, Hernando County Commissioner with awesome Hernando County. And today we're sitting out here on beautiful Pine Island in Hernando County with Gene Kelly. And Gene Kelly is a conservation biologist. And Gene, you've done a lot of things over your years, and especially in Hernando County. And what I'd like to do is turn it over to you so you can introduce yourself, and then we'll get right into our subject, which is going to be sea level rise.
Thank you, Diane. I'm glad to be here with you. I moved to awesome Hernando myself back in 1989 to accept a position with the Southwest Florida Water Management District. Spent 16 years working there as a conservation planner, and subsequent to that, I took a position with the Florida chapter of the Nature Conservancy, where I spent 5 years working as their conservation planner for the Florida chapter. So that kind of establishes how I came to live in Hernando, have been here ever since I came in 1989. And it also, that kind of work experience has done a lot to shape the way I look at Hernando County and my home, and what I think some of the major threats are that we have to deal with in the future.
Well, great, and I really appreciate all your hard work. I know I've worked with you over the years as a county commissioner when you were with the district, and certainly appreciate your stance on things. There were many things that we wanted to do, and Gene was there to tell us that it wasn't probably the right thing to do to protect our environment right here in Hernando County. And when we're talking about that, many people are suspicious of the reality of sea level rise and the doomsday scenario that press from dramatic or immediate action. So Gene, why should we believe any of this talk and concern about sea level rise, which is something that will happen at some point? And is it going to be happening at some point in the distant future?
Well, not only is it going to be happening in the distant future, it's happening right now. I understand the reluctance of people to perhaps tackle a subject like this that does seem to be less pressing to our everyday concerns than a lot of the other issues we deal with. Certainly, you're working with a lot of issues important to the residents of this county as a commissioner. But sea level rise is happening, and just from where we are right now, we could look out across the salt marsh here on the Hernando County coastline and see a lot of dead trees, most of them cabbage palms, out on those little islands scattered through the marsh, and that is just a harbinger of what's to come. And there are other areas nearby. You don't have to go very far north to Wackasassa Bay in Levy County, and there are large areas there where virtually hundreds of acres of cabbage palms are dead, and that is a direct consequence of sea level rise. It's been going on, somewhat imperceptibly to most of us, and when we look out, the shoreline is still a beautiful place to be, and people like to come out here and recreate, fish. But this change is happening, and it's just going to keep accelerating because the pace of sea level rise is accelerating.
Well, and that brings us to Hernando County, and again, you say we look out and we see the shoreline and how beautiful it is, but why should the people of Hernando County be concerned about the sea level rise?
There are a myriad of reasons for us to be concerned. Obviously, there's a lot of very valuable property along the shoreline, and that's right there, ground zero for the impacts of sea level rise, and for most people, that's probably what they would relate to most directly. Someone who lives along the coast and sees high tides getting higher, and they read about sea level rise, and there may be that tendency to just think, well, that's a future problem. I guess our kids and grandkids will have to deal with it. Ask the people of Miami Beach right now, where they're experiencing regular flooding. A lot of people refer to it as nuisance flooding, but it is basically sea level rise right there in the heart of Miami Beach. A storm drain system that was designed to drain water from the areas where people live is now a conduit for the sea to come in the other direction and flood those areas. And this is not something that the people of Miami Beach and their leaders, they have some very progressive leadership there that's recognized the reality, and they're really working to address it. It's not an abstract thing that's going to happen in the future. It is right now, and the time to start thinking about how we're going to deal with it is right now. So the people should care because it threatens their property.
Well,
Well, allow me to say also, I come at this as a conservation biologist, and so while I would share somebody's concern with their loss of property, I've spent my career working to preserve nature, and all this nature we enjoy along the coast is equally at threat, potentially more so, because when it comes to what are we going to do to limit the damage, you can bet that our focus is going to be on those developed landscapes and much less so on saving wildlife and the habitats that wildlife depends on. So while we have this discussion, I would like to spend quite a bit of time talking about how it's going to impact nature. And that's not a matter of, okay, so we've got people's homes and businesses along the shoreline, and then we've got nature. Well, what about our water supply?
exactly.
I mean, that's hugely at threat. So if people say, well, water is an important issue and we've got a lot of problems and we need to really make some investments in ensuring that we have a good, dependable water supply in the future, nobody argues with that. But one of the big threats right now is sea level rise. We live on a peninsula where we have water on three sides, and it's coming our way. And that bubble of water that most of us depend on, the Floridan aquifer, and to some extent surface water sources, that is going to be under direct threat from the saltwater intrusion that's going to result from sea level rise.
Wow. And, you know, I lived in Hernando County in 1993 when we had the no-name storm. And we're sitting out here on Pine Island. And Pine Island, there were houses that the water was past the rooftop on there. And, I mean, that was in 1993. We're talking, 23 years later? Or is it, you know, how long has it been? A long time since that. 23 years.
Yes,
so,
but a lot of us still remember that storm.
And that's not gonna say that that's not gonna happen again. And when it happens again, it could be a lot worse than what we have now. And again, I'm sitting here with Gene Kelly, and he's a conservation biologist, and we're talking about sea level rise and what this could, how it could affect us in the distant future and in Hernando County. And Gene, our community has many pressing problems to deal with. Why should we consider sea level rise to be an urgent problem given all the day-to-day challenges faced by our residents?
Well, you're right. People have everyday concerns. We have families to support, businesses to run, and we just spent a few minutes talking about how sea level rise poses a threat to our homes and businesses, other developed areas along the coast, to natural habitats along the coast, to our water supply. Well, how about our economy? If we don't think that the economic impact from sea level rise is going to be huge, then we really need to pull our heads out of the sand. And there have been some estimates made about what those economic impacts could be. But just here in Florida alone, it's projected, and this is based on a lot of different studies, that by 2050, more than $23 billion in existing property losses will occur along coastal Florida.
23 billion?
23 billion.
Wow.
And that doesn't include another 152 billion that will be threatened by regular inundation from high tides. So the kind of flooding that we see along the coast in association with storms and very high tides, it's all just going to be exaggerated by the additional impact that the sea itself is rising. So that the economic impact, not just on property losses, and that's what I was just talking about, the seafood industry.
Oh, yeah.
We are proud of our ecotourism, as well we should be, and it's not just valuable to tourists and the economic impact that they have on our county and on the entire state. I believe it's rated as the second highest positive impact on our economy, the tourist industry. But I, for one, like to go out and fish. I know a lot of other people like to fish. It's a big part of our quality of life, one of the reasons we're here. There's a lot of economic value in that. And just to put some other numbers out there that might resonate with people, what exactly does the seafood industry mean to the state? It's not just sales of seafood, it's the jobs that it creates. And that is in excess of $1 billion every year in this state. I talked about the recreational values associated with our enjoyment of the coastline, and that's much greater than $1 billion, I believe, based on most of the data. So that even exceeds the economic impact of the entire commercial seafood industry in this state. It's important to keep in mind that most estimates say that 90% of all commercially valuable seafood species are dependent on estuarine systems. Our bays and estuaries are the nurseries of that seafood.
And Hernando County is very big with the nurseries because of the seagrasses that we have. We're the second largest area in the nation with our seagrasses.
The Big Bend coastline as a whole is maybe the largest contiguous expanse of seagrasses in the world, and that is hugely important to our seafood industry. And then as you go a little closer to shore and you see all that beautiful salt marsh is more productive than the most productive farmland that we have in terms of the actual biomass that's produced by it. We don't really pay attention to it. We don't cultivate it. We don't really spend a whole lot of time nurturing it. But that and those seagrass beds and the other protected waters in the estuary, which basically an estuary is where saltwater and freshwater come together. So you have brackish water habitats. That is the basis of our seafood industry. If we lose healthy, productive estuaries, then we lose that industry. You can't ignore the fact that even if only a part of a particular species' life cycle depends on the estuary, then their entire life cycle depends on the estuary when you get down to it.
Well, and our fishing industry in Hernando County depends on that. We have one of the largest, as far as the, bringing in live shrimp that they ship out every day out of Hernando Beach right here. And that's because, again, of our grasses and the estuary and what they have available. So if you destroy that, then where do they go?
Indeed. And one relatively new wrinkle in all this is scalloping.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
become increasingly important to this county. I know it's very important to Citrus County's economy also. They recognize that, and they actually advertise themselves around the country. Come down here to the Gulf Coast of Florida and go scalloping. And we have actually guides that are making a living during that part of the year when maybe they may not be able to fill their calendar with people that want to go fishing, so they take them out
So
scalloping.
and that's a big deal to people who come here from New York City, which is wall-to-wall concrete and buildings there, and they come to Hernando County and they see, what we have here that can show them we're have a natural setting, and they see things that they could never see before. And scalloping is one of them. They just really think that that's really a wonderful thing. I mean, I was born and raised in St. Pete, and we used to come up here in this area and scallop years ago, and then I guess it died off, and then they started replenishing with the scallops, and I guess where they seeded them and got more scallops in. I don't know how they actually do it, but it is important to us. So another question I have, how would sea level rise actually express itself, and what would it look like, Jean? And again, I'm sitting here with Jean Kelly, conservation biologist, and I've been in Hernando County for many years, and we're talking about the sea level rise. So how would that work, Jean?
Well, this is where I guess my experience and perspective as a biologist really comes into play. When I was with the Nature Conservancy, we recognized the serious threat that sea level rise poses to Florida's native wildlife, to our biodiversity. And we actually secured some grants and did some modeling to really see if we could get a handle on what those impacts would be. And in the process of that, really I got a better understanding of the natural processes that will really be expressed when sea level rises. It's easy to imagine, and maybe this is a good point for us to really talk about what the possible level of sea level rise might be. How much sea level rise are we actually talking about? And it's a very complex thing to try and predict, but really all predictions now are that we'll see at least several feet of sea level rise before the year 2100.
Wow.
And there are other estimates that it could easily be 2 meters, more on the order of 6 feet, or even more. And really, those higher estimates are probably more realistic, because the earlier estimates, the lower estimates, really don't give full attention to the additional impact that melting ice sheets will have. So if we imagine, even conservatively, 3 feet of sea level rise, where we're sitting right now, you tell me where sea level would be.
Well, we wouldn't be sitting here.
We would not be sitting here.
And we're sitting out at Willie's on Pine Island, so, right here underneath the tiki hut, and just a few 100 yards from the water, and I guess we would be in a boat right now. We wouldn't be seeing the tiki hut.
That's right. And so, I mean, right now, NASA has estimated that sea level rises on the order of 3.5 millimeters a year. A millimeter is about the width of the thickness of a dime.
Mm-mm.
That doesn't seem like much, but you have to keep in mind that rate is accelerating. And a lot of people like to say, well, this is a natural process. Sea level rises have been rising and falling throughout the history of this planet and human history. And that is true. But the rate of rise that we're seeing now greatly exceeds anything that has ever been observed or measured and that's obviously more easily stated if we think about more recent history. So in the last couple thousand years, we are talking about a rate of sea level rise that is basically an order of magnitude higher than anything that has been seen. And that is the human influence.
So we shouldn't keep
this
our
planet.
blinders on.
We should not. And it's the pragmatic thing to do really is you use the term doomsday scenario, and there's really nothing constructive about raising the flags and saying this is something we just have to put at the top of the list. But it's something that we have to begin talking about and recognizing what it really means to our society. And here in Hernando County, we are one of those coastal counties. The great majority of the population in the state lives along the coast, and just given the economic impact alone, we really need to be giving this serious consideration.
So what sensible measures can we take to
yeah.
satisfy the current concerns? I mean, we're
Well,
talking about, we know that there's a problem, but what can we do?
And I do want to step back and talk about the process of sea level rise. What does it really mean? What's it going to look like? It's not just the sea's going to be higher in areas that are now dry, will not be. So when I think about how it's going to affect a coastline like the one we're sitting at right now, where we have salt marsh behind us, between us and the mainland, and open water with grass beds out to the west. If you think about the intertidal zone, as we would call it, that area between the high tide, the highest tides you get, and the lowest tides you get, the area where the tides inundate and then they go back, and that is ground zero, really, for where these processes are going to happen. And there's always this dance that takes place between erosion and accretion. Sediments get deposited. Basically, land is created when the currents, the tides carry sediments up. They're captured by all that marsh vegetation. It builds up. Land is created. Sometimes erosion, the rate of erosion, sediments being washed away, will exceed accretion, that creation of new land. So there's this kind of balancing act that takes place. And you can see, for some periods, accretion might exceed erosion and you get buildup. Then a big storm could come up and wash out that stuff that had accreted. That new land becomes wet again. And what we're seeing now basically is that process is being turned on its head, and erosion will exceed accretion. And in a natural setting, over those time periods with the natural changes in sea level, it was slow enough and gradual enough that if sea levels rose, those coastal habitats, the marshes and grass beds, would just kind of migrate inland. And so when that happens, you still have functioning estuaries. You're still going to have those coastal habitats that support all those commercially and recreationally valuable seafood species and a lot of other wildlife species that maybe we don't attribute those kinds of values to. But so where we have a natural shoreline and we have natural rates of erosion and accretion, those natural systems can persist. But the rate of rise we're seeing now is probably in most areas going to greatly exceed the ability of those natural systems to just migrate inland and adapt to those changes. And there are things that we are doing or are likely to do that will really make that even worse. I think it's in our nature to, when we're facing a problem, attack it. And so if people's property is at threat along the coastline, well, what are we going to do about it? There are a couple of different approaches you could take. You could lump them into retreat, surrender, and those are, in many people's minds, dirty words. Well, we're not
where
going
am I
to
gonna
retreat
go?
or surrender. We'll build higher seawalls. We'll build dikes. We will find technologies to save the day, and it's unrealistic to think that those kinds of solutions alone are going to do this. So before we rush to harden the shoreline, we need to really think about a mixture of strategies and responses. So I talked about those natural processes of erosion and accretion. Well, what happens when you put up a seawall or a dike there, and now the water is lapping at that? There's not going to be any accretion. Eventually, all those coastal habitats will be lost, and you'll have a seawall and open water beyond it, and not much life there.
No nurseries to replenish the growth of our sea life out there.
And so, if we take that harden the shoreline approach, that's really, there's a lot to be lost. And I think it's also important for people to understand that that will not be an effective strategy. It's not going to stop the saltwater intrusion that is threatening our water supply.
So we have a couple minutes left here, so tell us what our solution here is. Gene, I've heard all the problems. What can we do?
Well, it may sound defeatist, but in some areas I think we will have to retreat. And at the very least, right now, our leadership, people like you, Diane, really need to think about, should we be investing any more public resources, public money in coastal development when it sounds to me like a bad investment. The Gulf of Mexico along this coastline is going to claim a lot of that investment. Do we throw good money after bad? Or do we really think pragmatically? And I'm not saying we all run away from the coast, and I know people who live there and have invested in real estate there. That's not going to be music to their ears. But ignoring the issue and putting it off is only going to make it an even bigger challenge.
More dramatic, like the no-name storm. When it comes in, the next time it's going to be bigger and stronger.
Bigger and badder.
And
so yes, there are a lot of different strategies, and we can talk about adapting, and that would include things like not hardening shorelines, and there will probably be areas where we have to. Talked about what Miami Beach is doing. That's a stopgap, and they admit that. The measures they've taken to pump that water out, to keep it from coming in on those really, really high tides, but they know that's not their fix for the future. That just deals with the matter at hand today and tomorrow. And so they are thinking long and hard about this, and it's gonna require land use decisions that are potentially very difficult. I just think that we're up to the challenge. We just have to open our eyes and recognize it and start talking collectively about it. I'm a conservation biologist. I want to conserve nature. I know there are a lot of other important issues associated with this, and so we all need to put our minds together collectively and really think long and hard about what we can do. There's not going to be a one-size-fits-all.
Don't ignore it. And I have to tell you that our 30 minutes went pretty quick here, Jean, and I look forward to having you come back to talk to us about these issues and conservation and sea level rise and what we can do to help. And we're with awesome Hernando County, and I just want to remind people that you can also go to www.awesomehernandocounty.com and check out our website, and we do put many of these radio shows from 102.9 WZEU on there, so I encourage you. And again, Jean, I thank you for talking with us today.
It was my pleasure. I don't believe that was 30 minutes. We tried to cover so much ground in 30 minutes. I hope it didn't all sound too disjointed or incoherent, but it's a huge issue, and we could easily talk for hours about it. I do thank you for this
And we'll bring you back.
opportunity, though.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.